Alabama Republican Representative Mike Rogers and Washington Democratic Representative Adam Smith say they're taking, quote, bipartisan action to gather a full accounting of the operation in question. Joining me now to talk about this one is one of those representatives. It's Adam Smith, the Democrat from Washington State. Congressman Smith, thank you so much for joining us on NewsNation Prime.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate the chance.
All right. So in that joint statement with Representative Rogers, you said that you were taking, quote, bipartisan action to gather a full accounting of the operation in question. Can you elaborate a little bit on what details you feel like you're missing at this point?
Well, the big thing is, did the second strike happen? I mean, there's reporting on this, and nobody in the administration has specifically denied it. Secretary Hegseth hasn't. He just said it's fake news, but didn't address it. So question number one, did it happen? Did they have two survivors hanging onto the boat when a second strike was ordered? Did Secretary Hegseth give an order to basically take no prisoners? Is that the direction that this has been going in? So that is the biggest question. And then there are continuing questions about the legality of these strikes. If it's law of war, well, it's not law of war because according to the administration, we're not at war, because if we were at war, then Congress would have to authorize it. So if we're not at war, what is the justification for using lethal force on boats allegedly carrying drugs thousands of miles away from America? It's still not very clear.
What does it feel like to be a high-ranking member of Congress that is in charge of making decisions for our entire country, but still feel like you're missing critical information about a story that poses such heavy consequences when we consider what's happening in the Caribbean?
Yeah, look, it's been incredibly frustrating on two fronts, and I've been doing this for a while. I've been the ranking member for 15 years. I've dealt with a lot of secretaries of defense and a lot of departments of defense. I've never had one that was this reluctant to share information, and you've heard bipartisan criticism of this. They don't think Congress has the right to oversight. I've also never seen a Secretary of Defense so willing to basically imply that the law doesn't apply to him, that he can do what he wants to do. He doesn't have to answer to us. He doesn't have to answer to the American people. You've seen him kick the media out of the Pentagon, ridiculously saying you won't be allowed to stay in the Pentagon unless I can pre-approve the stories you write. I mean, that lack of accountability makes it tougher for us in Congress to do our job of oversight.
Yeah, to that point, we've seen Secretary Hegseth, as well as the Trump administration, argue that they don't need congressional approval for the ongoing strikes on these alleged narco-terrorist boats, saying that the military operations don't rise to the level of hostilities that would warrant authorization from Congress, which brings up the bigger question, which is, then why are we taking this action? Is there an argument to be made that if these boats don't actually represent real threats, then the action that the military is taking is therefore extreme?
That is precisely the contradiction. And they did very belatedly. This was a month after the strikes, actually a month and a half after the strikes had already started. They did produce a memo from the Office of Legal Counsel of the Justice Department attempting to justify this. And they've still classified it. I don't think that should be classified. I think they should present their justification to the American people. But, the rough summary of the memo, half of it is spending time talking about how these narco-terrorist groups are in essence at war with the U.S. and a profound threat to us. And the other half of it is spent saying, but we're not in hostilities. And that just doesn't make any sense. So It's not clear, and we need greater accountability.
Yeah, look, we're seeing the war secretary say it's all fake news. The Washington Post trying to back up their credibility, saying they actually used interviews that they gathered and accounts from 7 people with knowledge of that September 2nd strike and of the overall operation. What's your level of belief in sort of this Washington Post reporting on apparently these firsthand accounts from these 7 members that were aware of this operation?
Yeah, it's very hard to say at this point. Now, this coming week, I'm flying back to D.C. tomorrow. We are optimistic that we will get somebody from the Department of Defense to come in and tell us one way or the other. But look, on the whole lawful thing, we're having this conversation. It's the Department of Defense. It is not the Department of War. The law is very clear on that point, and the law has not been changed. And I think it's but one of many examples of how President Trump and Secretary Hegseth don't think the law applies to them. If you want to change it to the Secretary of War, then you have to pass something in Congress, because that's what we did to create the Department of Defense in the first place. The law ought to matter. It ought to be something that we at least try to pay attention to. Now, it can be complicated, it can be difficult, understood, but to have a Secretary of Defense who says, screw it, I can do whatever I want to do is dangerous for this country.
Representative Adam Smith from Washington, thank you very much for your time tonight, sir.
Thanks. Appreciate the chance.